All right. You can see the title for the series that we're starting into today up on the screen, The Red Sea Rules. It's developed from the book by Robert Morgan called The Red Sea Rules. Pretty profound. I had a good title there. And what it is a set of strategies, ideas, things to keep in mind when we're going through difficult times. All of us go through difficult times. Some people obviously encounter times that are more difficult than others. You know, I joke around, hey, how you doing today? I'm doing all right. Of course, some days are more all right than others. All of us have difficult times, but some people go through times that are more difficult than others. But the same God is over all and in charge of all. And it's important that we understand that. When we talk about God, now we've spent a couple of weeks looking at the names of God, and as we see the names of God, we learn the character of God. So many of his names, they are directly tied to his character to help us to understand who he is and how he operates. As we talk about the traits of God or the characteristics of God, the qualities of it, one of the things we talk about is the sovereignty of God. And that's really what this study is all about. The fact that regardless of what I'm going through, God is still in control. Even when it seems life has been put in a blender and turned on puree, he's still in control. And he's either in control of everything or he's in control of nothing. There's no middle ground. If he's God over all. He's not God over some things, over most things. He's God over everything. And so as we go through life and encounter, shall we say, challenges, obstacles, dead ends, as we go through life and find ourselves in difficult places, the God that led the children of Israel is the God that leads us, and just as he was in control then, he's in control now. As we go through this, maybe some weeks where we cover two of these, just depends on, a lot of it depends on today. If you look at the notes, you'll see page cuatros is blank. That doesn't normally happen, so it depends on what kind of time all this takes as to whether or not I do two in a lesson or no. Stop and think about where you are in life, what your life is about, things that you've gone through, things that you're going through. And then ask, as perhaps you do, how did I get here? And God is in control. Now that doesn't mean that I don't have abilities to affect that. Could the children of Israel have affected where they were and what they were? Well, yeah, they did that often, didn't they? Moses went up on the mountain. They're at Sinai. Moses is getting the law. The children of Israel are at the bottom doing what? Build us a God. They had the ability to affect their lives. That doesn't change the fact that God is in control, but God doesn't sit here like this with us and say, you're going to do it my way or else. God says, this is the way I want it done. I would like you to obey, please. If you don't, you're going to run into trouble. Now, with that in mind, there are lots of people out there who assume that all trouble is because we didn't do what God wanted. Can you think of Job's friends? Job is another great example of what we're going to see today. And here in the midst of extreme difficulty, his friends come and say, Job, you're a good guy. Too bad you didn't obey God. Right? And they had no idea what they were talking about. But we run into that in life, don't we? Everybody knows exactly why you're facing what you're facing, even though they don't have any idea why you're facing what you're facing. God is in control. How did I get to where I am? Have you ever been traveling and you find yourself with a sign, maybe not this sign, but something similar to that, and say, I must have made a wrong turn. And yet the children of Israel, as we get started here, we're going to find, they were exactly where God put them. And they ran into some difficulties. And so our first rule here is to realize that God means for you to be where you are. If you want to go to Exodus 14, that's our primary text. That's where we'll spend most of our time. Exodus chapter 14. Now, I've got this nice little dead end sign. This is not what the children of Israel ran into. They ran into that. There was no way out of where they were going. And we'll see that here. Exodus 14 starts out, and the Lord spake unto Moses. So notice who's giving directions. What better direction giver could you have? I've joked here before. I have my GPS, and way too often I just ignore whatever she says anyhow. Or of course I think it's a he now. My daughter has set it, not the younger daughter, the older daughter has set it up so it tells dad jokes. So it's a he talking to me now. Take the next right turn or else you'll be wrong. That kind of thing. It's like, oh, come on now, I've heard this every time I turn. But my GPS tells me where to go. There have been times the GPS, and I've followed it because I didn't know where I was, and it led me in a completely wrong direction. When I lived in Texas, I was in a fairly new subdivision. My GPS was convinced I lived in the middle of a field because the map was not up to date with reality. The GPS doesn't know everything. God does. They have God speaking. The Lord spake unto Moses, saying, speak unto the children of Israel, that they turn and encamp. He tells them where I want them to go. He tells them specifically between Migdol and the sea, over against. He says, I want you to go this direction. I want you to stop right here. You've got a city here, a region here, and a sea here, and this is where you're going to camp. He tells them exactly where he wants them to be. Look at the last clause in that verse 2. Before it shall ye camp by the sea. It's like he put a sign up and said, I want you right here. Look at verse 3. For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are entangled in the land, and the wilderness hath shut them in. Pharaoh knew where they were, and he knew the kind of land, geography, topography, that they were in. And he knew that they were in a dead end. There's no way out. Look at verse 4. And I, who's speaking, and I, God, will harden Pharaoh's heart, that he shall follow after them. About that time, what do you think is happening in Moses' heart? Or are you serious? I mean, think about it. We just left these people. They're mean and ugly. They've been beating us and whipping us and making us build things. And now they're going to come after us. Moses maybe did not fully understand the geography and topography. He's never been here before. God has. And I will be honored upon Pharaoh and upon all his hosts, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. Ooh, that's interesting. I'm going to have Pharaoh and his army follow after them so that they will know who I am. Oh boy, aren't they going to know who he is? We have the benefit of the rest of the story. Moses is getting this one page at a time and saying, I'm not sure I want to turn this page. But notice the last statement here. And they did so. That's not the Egyptians. That's the children of Israel. They camped right where God said, camp. Verse 5. And it was told the king of Egypt that the people fled. And the heart of Pharaoh and of his servants was turned against the people, and they said, why have we done this? I mean, think about this. They did not have cheap labor. They had free labor. You often hear, you get what you pay. They got more than they paid for. They made sure of it. And now all the free labor is off in the distance. We need to bring the free labor back. And he made ready his chariot and took his people with him. And he took 600 chosen chariots and all the chariots of Egypt and captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued after the children of Israel. And the children of Israel went out with an high hand. But the Egyptians pursued after them, all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, and his horsemen and his army, and overtook them, encamping by the sea. Notice they're right beside Pi-haroth, before Baal-zephon. They're right where God told them to be over here in verse 2. Kind of interesting. If we stop right there, not knowing the rest of the story, if we stop right there, we assume the rest of the story is the children of Israel were dragged back to Egypt and continued building pyramids. Right? If we didn't know what happens, and sometimes because we know what happens, we don't stop to think about all that's taking place. I have not been to Sight and Sound in years, in part because fairly expensive. That said, I like Sight and Sound because it takes black words on a white page and makes it come alive. And too often becomes nothing more than black words on a white page to us. We read it and really don't take it to heart. There are a lot of people with a lot of emotions here. There's a lot going on. And look at verse 10. And when Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. We talked about Moses a moment ago. Now we have the children of Israel. And they see what's happening, and they are just slightly terrified. Well, they're extremely terrified. They're sore afraid. And the children of Israel cried unto the Lord, and they said unto Moses, why in the world did you bring us here? There wasn't enough room to bury us there? Look at it. In verse 12, always amazing. Okay. Who took their arms and twisted their arms and made them follow Moses out? When Moses goes to Pharaoh and says, God says, let my people go, who told the children of Israel, you better go or we're going to kill you? They left on their own free accord. But every time there's a serious trouble, they blame Moses for making them leave. They didn't want to stay. But now they don't want to be where they are. Is not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. Oh, if they only know what's coming when they don't obey God and go into the promised land. But another story for another time. So that's where they find themselves. They are exactly where God tells them to be. And they find themselves with no way out. So let's start into the notes here. Oh, a quote first. This is really, really a good quote here. From C.H. Mackintosh. The sea was before them, Pharaoh's host behind them, the mountains around them. And all this, be it observed, permitted and ordered of God. They are in what did Paul say? A strait betwixt two? A couple of verses, I'm not going to turn to these. Isaiah 43 talks about the fact, God telling the children of Israel, hey, I will make a way. Isaiah 11, there will be a highway for the remnant of God will make a path. They did not know this back in Exodus 14. Very first thing that we see here, and what we've just read, the children of Israel, the Hebrews, they find themselves between the proverbial rock and a hard place. They are, the phrase I use all the time, they're in a box. I don't like to find myself in a box. I like to have options. Like, okay, what is going to work? They had no options. They're at that dead end that's that title slide, and there's no other way out. Maybe the sign doesn't say dead end, it just says no outlet. This is a nice way of saying what? Dead end. We've already mentioned this. The geography was against them. Ocean, sea, mountains, not good. Not only was the geography, the topography. It's not just where they were, it's where they were in relation to what the landforms were. You're not going to take all these people up and over the mountain. This is not The Sound of Music, where you're going to escape over the top of the Alps. They had escaped bondage in Egypt, and this is what we saw the children of Israel saying, only to find the exit closed and nowhere to go. You ever been traveling on the highway, and you know where you want to go, and you get to where you're supposed to get off, and there's road construction, you can't get off there? And now it's like, okay, what are my options now? That's where they were. They were exactly where they were supposed to be. The problem is, there was nowhere to go. And this is what we've been talking of here. The Red Sea, the mountains, the army, they were penned in, and there was no way to escape. It just wasn't going to happen. Now, let's think of life. Think of the challenges that we face. And it's a differing degree of challenge in each of these, but think of the challenges that we face. Sometimes the challenges that we face are family challenges, familial. It could be brothers, sisters, could be parents, could be children, different things that we face. And with that, there's a lot of different challenges that are related to family. It could be work challenges. It could be the people we work with. It could be the type of the work. I mean, there's any number of things that could be there. It could be health challenges. And that could be tied to the first. It could be that family members are going through health issues and making life challenging for everybody, right? I mean, think of the challenges that we face. But then we have to stop and think about the different responses to those challenges. How do I can't control your response, so I'm concerned about my response. That's the one I've got to deal with. How do we respond to those challenges? It is not at all uncommon to respond like the children of Israel. They were sore afraid. We face these challenges, we see that there's no way out, and we become fearful. Or maybe it goes to panic. You ever known that person? They just panic because they can't figure out what to do. And they kind of freeze because at that point they don't do anything. They're just there. Or maybe we worry, keeping in mind that God, our sovereign God, said, be anxious for nothing. Be careful for nothing. Don't worry about it. That's not like the old song, don't worry, be happy. That's not always going to happen. But I cannot worry and trust that my God is still in control. And so think of where we are, all that we're going through, the different responses that we could have, and then we need to stop and understand. Oh, back up, before I get into the next thing here. We talked about geography and topography. You've got maps in the back of your Bible. I'm not trying to replace those. I just stick them up here. They're coming from up in the north of Egypt, headed over this big, where's my laser right here? There we go. This is called, in Bible times, this was the wilderness of Shur. Okay? There was no major highway going through there. They had to get from here to here, and they're taking the scenic route. However, there were no bridges over the Red Sea, and it just didn't look promising. This one shows a little bit more of the terrain. And remember that quote that we had. The Red Sea in front of them, the mountains around them, the Egyptian army behind them, a little bit on the rugged side. They've got to try to get from point A to point B, even though there's no way to get from point A to point B easily. The easiest path would have been to stay up here, but that's not where God led them. God led them down, pinpointed. I want you right here. We need to understand that God leads us into cul-de-sacs for reasons that He knows. What's a cul-de-sac? It's a fancy word for a dead end. All right. What's a cul-de-sac? It's a dead end with a roundabout at the end, basically, is what it amounts to. You get to the end and it's like, oh, hey, look here, there's 3 houses down here. I guess I'll turn around and go back where I came from. They couldn't. But why were they there? Because that's exactly where God put them. That sounds like a head scratcher to me. If God is omniscient, didn't He know what they were going to face? If God is omniscient, didn't He know that there's no way out from right there? Oh, God is omniscient. He did know that, and He had a plan. And as we're going through the challenges in life, we need to understand that He has a plan. There are times we may feel trapped by circumstances. There's a song I've been listening to recently. It's called "In the Palm of His Hand." And one of the phrases is when it's not trapped, I don't remember what the word is off the top of my head now, but when I feel overwhelmed by the circumstances. There's no safer place to be than in the palm of His hand. If I am right where He wants me to be, all these circumstances can't do a thing about it. But it's easy for me to say about you, you need to understand that to live. And that's easy for you to say to me, but I need to understand that personally. And we have examples within the scripture. I've got a couple of them mentioned to you here. Joseph. Think of Joseph. Goes out to deliver a message from dad to his brothers. And they chunk him in the pit. And as if that's not bad enough, they sell him to the Midianites into slavery. At that point, is he ever going to see his family again? Ain't no way. But God. God had a plan. Joseph had this vision that he would govern, and his brothers didn't appreciate that. He had a vision that he would govern, and he found himself in prison. And that was a long process to get there. What are you going to govern, the rats in the corner? But we know the end of the story, don't we? He didn't. When he's in prison, he's in that same type of cul-de-sac that the children of Israel were. There's no way out. How about David? David is anointed to be king, and next thing you know, he's fleeing for his life. He's playing dodge javelin with Saul, as Saul tries to pin him to the wall on more than one occasion. And he's hiding in a cave. And then Saul's in the front of the cave. He's anointed to be king, and he's king at the back of the cave, I guess. But God had a plan. How about Hezekiah? Hezekiah finds himself surrounded by his enemies with no way out. And God says, I'll protect you. And causes news of another battle to come, and the king has to flee to go protect his homeland. And Hezekiah in Judah is protected. God is in control. So we find ourselves in this cul-de-sac. We feel trapped by these circumstances. Don't be surprised. Go ahead and turn over to 1 Peter 4. 1 Peter 4. We find ourselves trapped by circumstances. Things aren't going well. We shouldn't be surprised. God has given us a book full of promises. And this is a very precious promise here. 1 Peter 4, turned over here, and verse 12. Beloved, think it not strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened. Well, maybe this isn't a great promise. Don't think it strange concerning this trial which might try you. No, that's not what it says. Which is to try you. Don't be shocked, don't be surprised when troubles are all around you, because they're going to be all around you. I'm not sure I like that verse. Doesn't matter whether or not I like it, but I mean, stop and think about it for a moment. Peter's writing to these people, writing the words of God, saying, don't be surprised when trials come, because trials are going to come. Look at verse 13. Do what? But rejoice, inasmuch as ye are partakers of Christ's sufferings. Trials will come, and we are expected to rejoice in trials. What did Paul say? Rejoice evermore. Well, that's easy for him to say. He didn't have to go through what I'm going through. Right? I mean, think of the things that run through our mind, and the things that our mind speaks loud and clear that our mouth would never say. And this is all, and we've mentioned this, we won't turn over here, but in Philippians 3, where we talk about the fellowship of his sufferings. I want close fellowship with God. I don't like the fellowship of his suffering part, though. But in the midst of that, there is such sweet communion. Trials will come. The same God who leads us in is the one who can lead us out. We find ourselves in this cul-de-sac, this dead end. We're in this box. I have nowhere to go, nowhere to turn. I'm in trouble now. I don't know what to do. Oh, I don't need to know what to do. He does. He's in control. Just for time, I'm not going to be able to turn to these, but I would encourage you to look at the verses later. Hebrews 13:5. Quite simply, the statement is in the notes there. I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. God is speaking to them, and he's talking to these people who are going through trials and tribulations. They've been rousted from Israel and are scattered. And the same God who brought them to this point will lead them on from this point. In Job 23, we talked about Job earlier. In the middle of the book of Job, pick a chapter, doesn't matter. In the middle of the book of Job, did Job have any idea what the outcome was going to be? Not a bit. All he knew is that life was over except for the breathing. I mean, think about it. He's lost his family, except his wife. His wife's still there, but all of his kids are dead. He's lost all of his belongings. He has no means of support now. How's he going to support himself? His crops are gone, and all of his livestock has been carried away. He's lost his family. He's lost his support. Life's over except for the breathing. And then his friends come and say, hey, we're here to help you. Boy, if you'd have just done what God wanted, you'd be in a lot better place. And yet Job, as he speaks, says that God knows the way that I take. God is fully aware. We talked about this when we were talking about the names of God. Hagar, the God who sees, the God who is fully aware of everything that's taking place. He knew exactly where Job was. Job was not aware of Job chapter 1, where Satan comes to God and God says, or Job says, hey, God says, did you see Job down here? And Satan says, well, yeah, that's just because you've done so much for him. Job wasn't aware of that. All Job knew is that he's lost his family and he's lost his means of support. And yet, in the midst of that, he says, I may not know why I'm going through what I'm going through, but he does. God put the children of Israel in a very specific location. We talked about that. We read that, Exodus 14, 1 and 2. He told them, I want you to camp right there. When he did, he knew that he was putting him in a box. He also knew that he could open up the box. So how do we respond to this? We respond by converting worries to prayers, fear to faith. When I find myself in a place where there's nowhere to turn but God, then maybe I need to turn to God. Kind of makes sense, but it's a whole lot easier to say than it is to do, isn't it? Difficult times. We all face them. They find themselves in a rough spot. It should be second nature for us to, what is that? Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and, oh, hey, what's the rest of that verse say? God told us what to do. We need to understand that God has a purpose. God has a purpose. He has a reason for what he's doing. Now, not to be crass or sacrilegious, but wouldn't it be nice if he would let us in on the purpose once in a while? Right? But he is under no obligation to do so. He understands. And it's all happening that he might receive the glory. Think of Paul. I don't have it in the notes here today, but think of Paul. He has this thorn in the flesh, and I besought God 3 times. And God says, nope, my grace is sufficient. I want to be glorified through this. Whatever. No, that's not how Paul lived, was it? He besought God 3 times. God said no. He said, okay, then I'll keep moving forward. God has a purpose. In Isaiah 55, Isaiah tells us that God's ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. I don't need to understand why. I need to understand that he's in control. He wants his best for us. And, oh, hey, I missed my box on that one. Man's plans versus God's plans are always better. God's plans are always better. And as I'm going through this, I need to understand, I need to know that God has a purpose. I need to understand that God will bring good out of it. God wants good for us. Romans 8:28. Who's the us? To them who love God. To them who are the called according to his purpose. And God gets to determine what is good. I don't. I can tell you what good is. Good is nice house, nice car, no problems. And God says, no, good is that I received glory. And here's how it's going to happen today. This promise is to them who are the called according to his purpose. We've talked about Job, so I'm going to fly right through this next section here. Talking about Job. Job began as a good man with many possessions. He lost practically everything. We know, and there's a blank here. This blank is actually in the notes. Because how do you want to fill it in? His family was restored, his life was restored, however you want to fill it in. He had everything restored to him. And through the entire ordeal, God was fully in control and fully aware of what was taking place. Regardless of what Job was facing and regardless of the advice, using that word very liberally, regardless of the advice that he was receiving, God was fully aware of everything that was taking place. And Job was determined to lean on God. And then our conclusion, just some applications here. First of all, God never promised that life would be easy. Never said that life was going to be the proverbial bed of roses. way back a long, long time ago in a land far, far away, probably back in the early to mid 70s. I'm thinking Lynn Anderson had a song called, I beg your pardon, I never promised you a rose garden. I never promised you a rose garden. God doesn't promise us a rose garden. In fact, the last time we see Christ in the garden, it's the Garden of Gethsemane. Not good things happening there. Sometimes the garden is not a pleasant place. God didn't say it would be easy. Sometimes, in fact, it's not only not easy, it's very difficult. You go to work. Again, my job, some days are good, some days are bad, and some days are in between. When it's bad, it's really bad. So in between is good. But by comparison, right? Well, God never said life would be easy. In fact, sometimes it's pretty difficult. And often, we can't see any way out. But even if we can't see any way out, God knows. He is omniscient. He's fully aware. He sees everything. When we are where He wants, we are where He wants. Am I doing what He wants me to do? Well, guess what? Then I'm doing what He wants me to do. Pretty profound statement there. But think about that. How do I know what God wants me to do in a year and a half when I can't see in the future? I do each day what He wants me to do. And if I follow Him each day, guess where I'll be in a year and a half? I'll be right where He wants me to be in a year and a half. When we find ourselves in that box, again, that's the phrase I use at work, at home, anywhere. I don't like being in a box. When I find myself in a box, I need to remember that God is still God. The children of Israel, okay, I want you to go to Pi-Hahiroth. I want you to camp over here between Migdol and the sea. Sure, why not? There's a KOA over there. We're good to go. They unhook the camper, turn around, and, oh, that's not good. Children of the Egyptian army's coming. How did we find ourselves here? Because they did exactly what God told them to do. Well, why would He do that? Because He's God and nobody else is. And He knew exactly what steps He was going to take to show who He was. So what it all boils down to, we need to trust in God's sovereignty. As I said when we started, He's either in control of everything or nothing. There's no middle ground. So which is it? And here's the good part. It doesn't matter what I think. And it doesn't matter what other people think. Other people, they might get on and they might talk about the fact that they believe that God is a fable, and it doesn't matter what they say. He's still God. He's still in control. But I can't see a way out of this. Doesn't matter. He's still God and He's in control. But the doctor just said, He's still God. I may not know how, why, or what's next. He's still God. I need to trust that He has a plan and a purpose, and that He will accomplish His plan and His purpose. He asks me to humbly trust and obey. That is Red Sea rule numero uno. Again, maybe we will do one a week. We'll see. Made it through all 45 minutes today, so we'll see how we go. Hopefully it's helpful and beneficial for you. Father, would You guide in all that we do? I pray, God, that You'd give us the wisdom and discernment that we need to live day by day. And Father, help us to have a heart of trust that wants to know who You are and that wants to follow You wherever You lead us. Father, I pray that You would accomplish Your purpose in this place. God, be with the service to come, and be with the pastor. Give him the words to say. Help us to have hearts and minds that are open and attentive to what You have. Father, would You set aside the distractions, the hustle and bustle of life. Help us to be focused upon You, upon Your word. Teach us and train us, we ask. In Your name, amen. Hey, have a great day.